Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2021. And that brings us to the title released by the Criterion Collection under the designated spine number of 1086. And this is a film from 1992. The director is Bill Duke, and the name of the work is Deep Cover. This is the work from 1992, and it is based upon the screenplay that is credited to Michael Tolkien and Henry Bean, and it has a brilliant, wonderful cast, included in which are, for example, Lawrence Fishburne and Jeff Goldblum and Victoria Dillard and Gregory Sierra, Sidney Lassick, Clarence Williams III, etc. This is, of course, the film from the great filmmaker and artist, the director, Bill Duke. The work is called Deep Cover. Deep Cover is a very richly complex and dense and very energetic and oftentimes shocking, very surprising and thoroughly engaging work that is about many things. I think if we were to try to focus on the plot or story structure or the essence, the story essence of this film, I think we could focus in our discussion on the character played by Lawrence Fishburne, who is this police officer, this cop who is hired essentially by the DEA as played or portrayed by Charles Martin Smith. And this interaction leads to essentially this plot to have Lawrence Fishburne's character go undercover, under deep cover, as it were, the undercover cop, in an attempt to establish a type of bona fides in order to be able to gain a sense of credibility for his cover. And his cover has to do with drug dealing and a drug racket that is part of a plan to infiltrate this drug racket or drug ring in this part of the world, in this part of the city, Los Angeles in the United States, California, the United States. And so his attempts to try to infiltrate this particular drug ring to essentially try to bring down the big players in this particular operation or series of operations. And along the way, we see a very complex and nuanced and quite a truly captivating psychological portrait that is being portrayed through Bill Duke's cinema, as embodied by the performance of Lawrence Fishburne, and his character and the dynamics that it goes through and the pressures that it feels, both external pressures and indeed internal pressures, and those internal pressures and say trauma situations, as it were, that are revealed quite early on in the film, at the very start of the film, in fact, dealing with certain events that involved his childhood and his father. These and other reasons form the backdrop of the psychological portrait of this particular character, who is, as I say, is having to infiltrate this particular organization or set of organizations. In that process, he meets a number of other characters, included in which is the character played by Jeff Goldblum. And this dynamic between these two characters, the David character and the John Hull character, so the Jeff Goldblum character and the and Lawrence Fishburne character respectively. This forms one of the fascinating backbone dynamics of the work, because part of the focus is on the relationship between these two and their sort of criminal dealings, and what it is that the Jeff Goldblum character is trying to do within his own seemingly limited position within this organization, or within the set of operations, I should say. But what is his own ambitions, and how does his own, say, ambition or folly, or sense of, say, greed, or sense of wanting to break out of his particular situation, what does that mean in terms of the consequences for him and for the rest of the people around him, including the characters, say, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and also the Victoria Dillard character. And therein lies yet another set of series of, say, human interactions or relationship dynamics between and among these three, in particular the Lawrence Fishburne character and the Victoria Dillard character, and what that means further in terms of a highlighting or augmenting, or perhaps a challenge to, or perhaps certain circumstances that lead to various, say, challenges towards the character's concept of his own humanity. And I'm referring to the Russell character, or the John Hull character, the character portrayed by Lawrence Fishburne, and what it is he has to deal with in terms of trying to achieve his objectives while still trying to maintain a sense of his own humanity, while still also balancing all these external forces, these sort of political pressures that seem to be tearing him or stretching him out in all sorts of opposite directions. And I bring the conversation in this context back to the Charles Martin Smith's character and the DEA element, because here also embedded is a story that seems also quite almost geopolitical in the types of Machiavellian machinations that are at play, that are beyond his control, and yet that have very, very serious ramifications as to the whole core philosophy of why his character, the Russell character, Lawrence Fishburne's character, is doing this in the first place. And when those two are challenged, when he sees various, not just hindrances and obstacles, but very certain events or characters or situations that really shake him to his very core, then he needs to make certain choices, and he has to ask himself very, very difficult questions as to the state of his being, the state of his mind, the state of his very soul, in fact, in this situation as an undercover cop, with the cover of dealing with illicit substances, illicit drugs, etc., and how that affects his own psyche, and what choices he makes towards that direction or in that direction. How much of him is acting as an undercover cop, or how much of him is actually becoming the cover that he had assumed at the start. And that type of confusion, or that type of very complex psychological examination or portrait in cinematic terms, is one of the great strengths. It is a really tremendous strength of this film, and how the more embroiled and the deeper that he goes, the more complex and more ambiguous the world actually is before his very eyes. Indeed, our eyes too, as the viewers, because we actually see wherever one turns, there is in fact a subtle nuance that is at play. Things that might seem to be somewhat antagonistic, thus gain a sense of, say, a welcome or a sense of allure. Whereas the other sides, the sides that one might have thought might have been representing, say, justice or a type of righteousness, we discover, in fact, have a certain sense of nuance and complexity, and perhaps amorality or an immorality, depending on one's perspective. And so this type of very, how should I put it, this type of subtle, nuanced approach that is revealed as the film progresses is another strength of the film. So the psychological portrait of Lawrence Fishburne's character, and indeed other characters as well. This is one of the strengths, and also the way in which the layering and the revealing of things poses more questions, or gives us yet further nuance and complexity that makes the whole set of circumstances even more dire and even more compelling and even more achieving a sense of consequence and significance. So whatever choice is made, there is indeed a consequence, or a series of consequences here. And also there's a very powerful and compelling way that the characters' humanities are presented, the frailty of the characters, the strength of the characters, the camaraderie between and among the characters, the warmth between and among the characters, and the cruelty and the deception that is also created between and among the characters. And this also brings into the fore, or brings into the equation, if you will, questions or concerns, or perhaps discussions on a character emotional level, and also on a plot level, issues both direct and also nuanced, of race and race relations. There's also the idea of salvation in the face of, say, great sin, if we were to talk in terms of a sort of religious connotation, because this is also part of the conversation when we think about, say, the Lawrence Fishburne character's relationship to another great performance, another great character portrayed by Clarence Williams III. And so this becomes yet another angle that this film operates in. And my goodness, when everything reaches a certain point of pressure, it's really just a dazzling feat, and it's a dazzling set of circumstances. Or to put it another way, the way in which things erupt is it's very memorable, and it has the potential to shake one as one watches it, and it leaves one just on the edge of one's seat, really, to find out how things will proceed and how things will end up happening. And so there is this sense of a momentum and a sense of inevitability, as well as the richness of the psychological portraits and the human dilemmas that are at the heart of this film. And we really feel it too, because of the soul that is given to each of these characters. They are really portrayed with a sense of heart and dimensionality and a sense of believability, because they are given the room by Bill Duke and his cinema. They are given the room to be living, breathing characters that are dealing with ordinary or perhaps extraordinary circumstances, again, depending on where one finds oneself in the film. And it has this beat, and it has this rhythm, and it brings us to many different, perhaps surprising, shocking places, but always with a sense of drive, always with a sense of momentum, much like, say, another very famous aspect of this film, much like, say, the music and the way that, for instance, the song Deep Cover, and we will talk a little bit about this when we speak about the Criterion supplements, but much like, say, the song Deep Cover has this driving, almost pulsating bass line that has this almost sort of a powerful, almost overwhelming, and even ominous and sinister sense of a type of progression forward to its conclusion. In much the same way, we have this powerful, almost sinister way, the beat, the drive of the beat that this film is operating on. And it is always compelling, it is always exciting, it is always asking questions, it is always filled with nuance and even a sense of maybe moral ambiguity. And that is the point. That is the point of the cinema of Bill Duke in the form of this film Deep Cover. And we will also get a sense of this in the Criterion supplements, which are great, by the way, and how Bill Duke, as a filmmaker and artist, is trying to portray this world and all of the subtleties, all of those human moments that make for a compelling watch. And indeed, this film is so compelling for so many reasons, but I think one of the main reasons why it is so compelling is because we feel the pain of these characters. We feel the anguish. We also feel the almost the inevitability of what it is they need to choose, what things they have to do in order to not just survive, but also succeed and feel a sense of triumph as well. We are there with the highs, we are also there with the lows, and we are also there every point of the way in between. What an absolutely magnetic, amazing achievement. It is exciting, it is thrilling, it is also so thought-provoking. It has so many questions that remain relevant and resonant, and they resonate all throughout this film and beyond, and they remain relevant then and they are relevant now. What a powerful, powerful artistic achievement this is. This is the film Deep Cover. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Deep Cover. It's spy number 1086, and it is purported to be based on a new 4K digital restoration of this film. And wow. It's so great to have this film released on the Criterion Collection like this. And as I say, the film is truly amazing. And the presentation is great. This overall package and design is really great. It gives a sense of a type of story. It is an undercover story. It is a story about this police officer. It is a story about his life and his psychological, the terrain that he has to traverse and all the effects that has. And it is very nuanced and morally ambiguous as well. And that's one of the great strengths. And I think it's all presented. There's a sense of that presented in the overall presentation. And the presentation is wonderful. Also, as we know with Criterion releases, we will also get a number of supplements that are included in this particular release. This happens to be the Blu-ray release. And we have a number of great supplements. So first up, we have a one-on-one interview with the director, Bill Duke. And this is from 2021. This is approximately 18 minutes. I have to say, Bill Duke and his comments and his interview and the way he responds to questions here and also in another supplement which we'll get to momentarily, and just his manner and the calm demeanor with which he provides his answers and responses is so he's so charming, and he is so down to earth, and he is also very modest, and yet he is so intelligent. It's such a joy to listen to Bill Duke. It is really such a joy to listen to Bill Duke here, and there's another supplement, but let's focus on this particular one, which is again a one-on-one type of interview, where it's essentially him speaking about his outlook, are giving us also in a sense a type of primer, if you will, on his own career and some of the landmark or touchstone moments in this very illustrious career. For example, some of his work early on, and so he mentions or he makes reference to, for example, 70s cinema, and indeed there is a trajectory, if you will, of this film Deep Cover. It came out in early 90s and specifically 1992, and this is a very key year for a lot of reasons which we'll get to momentarily. But also there are links from a cinematic historical perspective and other perspectives to 1970s cinema, and this is an area that Bill Duke also makes reference to at the very start of this. He talks about the idea of the cinema of this time and examples of capturing the experiences of sort of a black character experience on screen. Sometimes this is referred to as blaxploitation, and Bill Duke makes reference to this, but Bill Duke also makes reference to the fact that there were also other types of stories that were being told by other artists, other filmmakers that were doing really great and important work on screen, in cinema, and also on stage, in Broadway, for example. So he mentions, for example, artists like Gilbert Moses and also Melvin Van Peebles, and also this gives us an opportunity to hear Bill Duke and to hear his early experiences in terms of acting on the stage, as it were. And also this leads into a conversation where he mentions Michael Schultz and Car Wash, and he mentions the wonderful time that he had on the set of Car Wash. And so it's wonderful to hear those comments from him about that. And that's not all, because he then talks about his other acting work. He mentions Palmerstown, USA, for instance, and this leads perhaps later in the conversation to some of his other TV work, not just in front of the TV camera, but also behind, because he's also had a very great career in terms of his directing for certain TV shows, but we'll get to that in a moment. But he mentions here Palmerstown, USA, and he also mentions then American Gigolo, and working on American Gigolo, and he also mentions, he uses the occasion to make some really lovely anecdotal remarks about Richard Gere, and working with Richard Gere, and the type of popularity that Richard Gere had, especially at that time. And so lovely comments. And Bill Duke then goes into discussion. As I mentioned before, he was also a director, and he directed a lot of television show episodes. And he says that, for instance, he says that he was the first black director on the TV series of Dallas, and this leads him to a type of astonishing moment that he shares with us, an anecdote that he has about when he arrived on the set, or when he arrived on the sound stages for the first time, arriving for his first day of work, as it were, as the director of a Dallas episode, and how he responded to a particular comment that was told to him. It's a really astonishing anecdote. So and the way he handles it and the way he expresses it, amazing, really amazing. And that's not all, too, because then he talks about other acting moments that he had, in particular working with Joel Silver and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and also Carl Weathers. And so he mentions work with those actors as well, and Carl Weathers of Action Jackson. Great stuff. And he's always so generous, and he's expressing gratitude, and he's expressing enjoyment with working with these particular artists. So again, this is another great example of Bill Duke and the type of person that he is, and how he is expressing working with these other individuals, and how this is also a very important part of Bill Duke's career. And then he talks about his own work, and of course he mentioned a little bit about his TV directing work, but now we get into the start of his feature film directing, or the TV feature films, or the feature film directing that will lead to, of course, his great work on Deep Cover. So he talks a little bit about A Rage in Harlem, and also he mentions a really interesting episode that he had with the director Samuel Fuller, and regarding the Samuel Fuller film Street of No Return. And Bill Duke is talking about an exchange that he had with director Fuller, and about the camera, and his philosophy about the camera needing to represent the perspective of someone. And he asked Samuel Fuller about a certain shot that was in a very extreme angle, and so the angle was so extreme such that it was probably difficult at first to ascertain exactly from whose perspective or vantage point this particular shot was meant to be. And so he asked the director, and then Samuel Fuller replied and said, "Yes, it is from a perspective. It is from my perspective, the director's perspective." And then Bill Duke takes this, and I'm not expressing it as well as Bill Duke. Please watch the interview and listen to the story, because he tells it so well, so much better than I could. His words are brilliant. But Bill Duke mentions this as being such a, almost a, what did he describe it? He said it changed his perspective on directing, about the idea of the camera capturing various perspectives. And those perspectives could potentially be anyone's, including his own as the director. And this is leading us to a discussion by Bill Duke within this interview about Deep Cover. And wow, again, working with New Line Cinema, working with explaining issues, or not issues, but explaining the process of casting certain roles. Jeff Goldblum, Lawrence Fishburne, of course, Clarence Williams III. The need for the chemistry to work between the two characters, and indeed there is so much chemistry between Lawrence Fishburne and Jeff Goldblum. It is through the roof, fantastic. And then also the story about the DEA element, the Charles Martin Smith character, which is also such a crucial role, and how that introduces elements of greed, of corruption, of the idea of Machiavellian influence that is beyond the scope of the individual, because it has broad geopolitical implications. There's also the idea of race and perceptions based on race, and this is revealed very early on in a very famous scene in this film. It's often referred to as the interview scene between Charles Martin Smith and a number of other performers, included in which, of course, is Lawrence Fishburne. And so this provides the opportunity for Bill Duke to, again, reiterate and remind us and emphasize about his perspective and philosophy on cinema as expressed in, say, Deep Cover, which is, or one of the facets, or one of the principles of that philosophy, as he so explains, is the idea of portraying even portraying the humanity of even flawed individuals is still a very important objective of this film. And indeed, he portrays, or his cinema portrays, the humanity of these characters so well and so thoroughly, and there's still room for questioning, and there's still room for a type of wonder, and there is still room for a type of engagement, but there is never a type of judgment taking, or there's never a type of looking down on a particular character through the lens of Bill Duke's cinema and his camera. So there is this earnest portrait of each of the characters as portrayed by Bill Duke. And sometimes this might lead to very difficult questions of how characters will act in difficult and perhaps morally ambiguous circumstances. But that's still part of the exploration of, and that's the brilliance of a film like Deep Cover, because it doesn't shy away from that difficulty one bit. So showing images in a humane way, that's another way he expresses it, and showing things the way they are, because they are the way they are. And that is, I think, also a very profound statement, showing the greed versus the humanity. The word humanity and the word humane is so important, and it's used quite often. And indeed, this could be one of the great characteristics of Bill Duke's cinema and his outlook as expressed through his cinema, the need and necessity to maintain a faithfulness to what might be called the humane. And this is so profound, and it's so apropos, a story like Deep Cover, all the way through. A brilliant conversation. Please check it out if you can. Once again, this is the one-on-one interview or discussion with Bill Duke, approximately 18 minutes. That's not all, because next we have a post-screening discussion, a type of panel discussion with Elvis Mitchell as a type of moderator, and he invites on the stage after a screening of Deep Cover. And this is at the American Film Institute Conservatory. It's described as being from 2018, and Elvis Mitchell's guests are Bill Duke and Lawrence Fishburne. This is approximately 56 minutes, and here they are speaking for essentially the first half of this presentation. They're speaking about the film, and Elvis Mitchell is asking them questions, and there's a discussion on the stage about certain facets of the film, deep cover. And then the latter half is the panel, or Bill Duke and Lawrence Fishburne taking questions from the AFI audience, and so the AFI students at the time that were in attendance. And so a really, really great interview, or not interview, but a great panel discussion with Bill Duke and Lawrence Fishburne. They mention, for instance, Charles Martin Smith. They mention casting, and how in Bill Duke's words he wanted to go for, and he doesn't mean this, and he means this in a very earnest and sincere way. He wanted to go for what he called type of non-traditional approach. The idea of it wasn't about necessarily, it was always about believability for him. And believability is not always in sync with a type of traditional approach to casting when it comes to, say, Hollywood films, for example. And so this is what I think Bill Duke is referring to. And this leads to some really great casting choices. They mentioned Sidney Lassick, for instance, and Gregory Sierra. Great roles. And also Clarence Williams III. I love this moment here, because when they first mentioned Clarence Williams III, Lawrence Fishburne says, CW3. Oh, my goodness. The love and admiration in the air. Oh, what a great moment. And they speak lovingly about Clarence Williams III. And also this gives Lawrence Fishburne the opportunity as to how he reacted when he heard about this opportunity to work with Bill Duke. And he mentions how he knew Bill Duke's work at The Killing Floor with Dennis Farina, about 1919 Chicago race riots, and imploring and encouraging people to watch the works of Bill Duke leading up to Deep Cover, and of course beyond as well, Hoodlum, etc., which is also mentioned by a number of the participants or a number of the audience members. Great stuff. And are making reference to Henry Bean, and also how this could have been a sequel to Internal Affairs, and it ended up being this film Deep Cover. And indeed, therefore, the idea of the issues or elements of race and race relations might not necessarily have been there present at the start or the genesis of the story, but actually as the production process led up to the actual filming, then the idea or the element of race and race relations was introduced, and thus became the type of, say, a part of the landscape against which the eventual film Deep Cover came into being. So a wonderful set of comments on that point. I love other comments here. They're talking about it as a type of emotional epic where all the stakes are heightened. This is like high drama or opera. And indeed, the stakes are so high in a lot of places. And as I say, there are a lot of highs, and where there are highs, there must be lows, and there are so many of those, and they're handled with great care and precision. And you can see the thought process play itself out as Bill Duke and Lawrence Fishburne are retelling the tale, the production detail background. It is amazing. And I love to hear Bill Duke is also talking, or he's given the opportunity to talk about his approach as a director to working with actors, because Bill Duke himself, as we know, has a great acting career background. And so the director who has this experience as an actor is telling the audience, and thus telling us at this AFI event, about his approach as a director to actors. And he has this great respect. And he says, and I paraphrase, he says, acting is surrendering to what the author wrote. And acting involves this idea of being fearless. Fearlessness is a necessary key to acting. And it's like an actor has to fall down and fall behind him and not know what's there in the darkness, but the director is there to catch and to support that performance. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And then when taken into the context of a discussion of deep cover, there are some moments where some of the turns and some of the choices of the act, it goes into really deep and profound, quite idiosyncratic, quirky, very memorable moments and actor choices that form the very essence, the fabric, if you will, the atmosphere, the feeling in the air that makes deep cover so great as it is. And so there's a particular scene involving a very dramatic scene involving the characters played by Jeff Goldblum and Lawrence Fishburne and Clarence Williams III. It's a really, really intense scene, and there's a particular way that Lawrence Fishburne says a certain line, and it's repeated in this particular talk. Oh, this is an example, and they actually mention it too, how this approach was improvised to a certain degree, which is fascinating to me, that there would be this almost this chance taken, and it is a very quirky choice, and it works so well. And I think this is an example of what Bill Duke and Lawrence Fishburne were saying about it takes fearlessness. It takes a sense of bravery in a certain way and the hands and to act in this particular way within the zone that is presented and developed and built by the director, that is Bill Duke. Amazing comments. So this is and they talk a number of other things. They talk about what it was like working with New Line Cinema at the time. They also talk, there's a great comment about how each of these moments in the film almost feel like one-act plays. This is made referencing, for instance, an early scene involving Glyn Turman, as well as in a very memorable key role. And how this too could be seen to almost be like its own little one-act play. So the film is maybe a selection or collection of a lot of one-act plays that, of course, combine to form one coherent and organic whole. Still, I think the point is that there is a sense of a beat and a heart and a real essence, an essential moment that is expressed essentially everywhere in the film. And it's balanced also in a way that is clever. It's paced in a way that is kinetic and exciting. Great. And there's a little detail there. They talk about how there's a moment where Lawrence Fishburne throws a little prayer book, and that little detail about how the characters seem to be existing even when the camera could be turned off at that particular moment, but it's still running. And so that gives more life to the world. And Bill Duke then mentions Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. He speaks here about the hero's journey. This is a journey that can be expressed by basically anyone. The hero's journey can be experienced by the important characters, or maybe sometimes even the most quote-unquote minor or seemingly unimportant characters. Even the smallest role, or the smallest character, or the character in the smallest role, has his or her own hero's journey. Wow. This is indeed another way to say or to highlight that comment that he said in an earlier supplement, where he was focusing on the importance of expressing the humanity. This is exactly what he's talking about. The expression of the humanity from the main top billing roles all the way down to, say, supporting character roles. Each person has an importance and significance in the eyes of the filmmaker artist Bill Duke. Wow. So, fantastic. He also mentions a little detail about the couch here that is part of one of the scenes in the film. The couch. There's a little detail he reveals. Mind-blowing. And then they take questions from the audience, and the questions are about they address certain things about how details that Bill Duke wanted to address in terms of the looks of the characters, and how they wanted to capture a sense of the timelessness. There is also feel in the air of late 80s, early 90s America, and this is also very significant, and we'll talk about this later in the video. But also at the same time, in parallel, Lawrence Fishburne and Bill Duke here are emphasizing the importance that they placed on creating a sense of the timelessness. And this is also derived, or it's made mention in the context of, say, the look that they were trying to achieve, that the haircut that they're trying to achieve, or they're trying to figure out in pre-production regarding Lawrence Fishburne, and a significance to the naming that is used. Hull, wow, and the like. And they're talking. They make reference a little bit to the song Deep Cover. And we'll talk a little bit about that momentarily. Again, mention was made about the film Hoodlum. Oh, great. Boyan Bazelli, the cinematographer, and also has a role in the film as well. And working in TV, working with very important figures. The dean of Yale Drama School, Lloyd Richards, is mentioned. And some of the improvisational aspects of the film. Here, Lawrence Fishburne and Bill Duke make mention also of the character of Eddie, played by Roger Ganvier-Smith, and how his performance had these really quirky choices that worked so well in those particular scenes with the Eddie character. And yes, so memorable indeed. And also, there's mentioning by Lawrence Fishburne, and this wonderful anecdote that ends the piece regarding Deep Cover and Marlon Brando. So, all in all, wow, great stuff. Great stuff. And again, another wonderful opportunity to hear directly from Lawrence Fishburne and Bill Duke. What a fantastic talk this is. Again, this is just shy of an hour. It's approximately 56 minutes. Yes, this is the AFI discussion moderated by Elvis Mitchell with Lawrence Fishburne and Bill Duke. But that's not all, because then we have another discussion from 2021. This time it is between film critics and historians and cinema experts, Raquel J. Gates and Michael B. Gillespie. And this is approximately 35 minutes. And this is a brilliant discussion between these two experts and scholars. And they are speaking about the era and the context of this film vis-a-vis the 1990s and what they refer to as the 90s black cinema. And they refer specifically to the importance of the years 1991 and 1992, where you had this these films from these new directors that were giving voice and giving expression to what became a 1990s black cinema. And there are really a lot of examples of this, again, starting in 1991 that they mention. New Jack City and Juice and Jungle Fever, and then also Deep Cover coming in 1992, and of course many others. And so this is a wonderful discussion in this context, and it also gives the opportunity to provide further context as to the historical and cinematic links between what they refer to as 1990s black cinema and, say, black cinema from the 1970s, and maybe the historical contexts and the bases upon which the social and economic bases upon which this cinema emerged at that particular time in the 70s and then in the 90s, and how there are echoes, but also there are key differences as well between the two. But there's also this sense of kind of continuity and an excitement and a type of independent cinema spirit, or independent film spirit, that is at play here. And they also acknowledge that maybe some of the films are maybe not as good as others, and this of course provides a discussion for reminding us of the wide variety of types of cinema that were emerging here, and in particular in the 1990s. I think Raquel Gates reminds us too about how there were many genres that were being represented, including this film, Deep Cover. So there were comedies, there were romantic dramas, there were maybe war movies, and then there were also these biopics, and then there was a film like this, which they describe initially as a type of film noir or neo-noir. But what's so great about this discussion between Raquel Gates and Michael Gillespie is that they actually try to deconstruct the term film noir or neo-noir and how it applies or doesn't apply to this film, Deep Cover. And so that's another great turn of this conversation. But the point is that it has a wide range or a wide reach of expression. And that's also due to the fact that we have so many voices, many of which young, emerging, new voices, new talents, new directors. John Singleton mentioned as well. And so here we have a discussion of the context in which this film, Deep Cover, emerges. This is such a powerful set of comments, and it's a powerful reminder of the history of this time, because we also have to remember and also they mention, the way in which perhaps Bill Duke can be seen to be a really integral part of this particular dynamic, and how Bill Duke is coming from his career as an actor, as well as a TV director, as well as, of course, a feature film director, and occupying multiple roles. And I think Raquel Gates here makes a really brilliant comparison between, say, Bill Duke and his career and the trajectory of his career, the sort of the multi-pronged trajectory, the many trajectories of his career on the one hand, and making a great comparison with, say, someone like Spencer Williams on the other. So, and indeed, Bill Duke has a really a memorable acting career, and there are some roles that are iconic, and not to mention, of course, his work behind the camera. So, and then they continue the conversation with specific issues or examples of the thematic concern or the way in which the film treats or handles or identifies or otherwise represents or expresses issues of race and racial identity and race relations, as it's part of the fabric of this world, and also the film and the story and the characters in particular and specifically. And it's also spoken about in the context of the film noir or the neo-noir term that I think in particular Michael Gillespie discusses and perhaps uses in a way to perhaps deconstruct the meaning of that term, and perhaps shows us possibilities of how that term may or may not necessarily be applicable to a film like Deep Cover, in terms of the fact that it seems also on the one hand to be forging its own path ahead on the one hand, but also there are links to the noir tradition in the sense that this film is very much a type of internalized psychological portrait, which is a very key detail that these two scholars point out, because they also point out to a very interesting trend that they recognize and they identify in the context, say, of this period of 1990s black cinema. And it's, as a general statement, they point out their observation that for a lot of these films, it was also very important to try to make a type of, say, statement, or to try to make a type of resolution, maybe within the film's environment, or limited to the film's environment, granted, but still a type of resolution or a type of statement that would be speaking to issues of, say, socio or economic or political landscape of the time, or cultural landscape of the time. So the film or the filmmakers of a lot of these examples from this period of cinema were trying to make some kind of cinematic or a statement via cinema of something that was political or social or economic or all three. So that is one of the trends that these two scholars identify in this conversation on the one hand. But that is such a very profound statement, because then they turn the conversation back to this film Deep Cover, and what they find so extraordinary, and this observation is it's really mind-blowing. They observe that this film Deep Cover seems to run almost antithetical to that type of approach. In other words, this film does not seem, in terms of its own standing, as it were, to try to make some kind of statement about, say, race relations, or to try to create some kind of cinematically expressed equilibrium that is meant to stand in for a type of quote-unquote larger message on society. On the contrary, the scholars recognize that this film is very internalized, and it's very much a psychological portrait. It looks at, say, the issue of drugs or illegal substances and drug use, not in the context of some kind of social statement or moralizing, but rather in the context of the internal emotional turmoil of the characters. And so it is a very personal story. And it remains a very personal story. Again, we are reminded of the approach of Bill Duke and his cinema, the importance of identifying and capturing and respecting the humanity of the characters. This is the point, right? This is the point of the film, or one of the great, profound points of the film. And it, in fact, in one way of seeing it, in fact perhaps refuses this type of a social statement effect in terms of maybe similarly situated films, as it were, which is very profound, and which in and of itself is a type of statement or a type of statement on cinema and depictions of race and race relations. And this is where the conversation, it already became interesting, because it becomes yet more further turns in a very interesting direction, because they speak about how some of the characters within the space of the film, maybe what do they say? They call each other out, they recognize, or they actually state, or they express out loud some of the issues of race and race relations and racism that might be inherent or implicit, or might be nuanced in the choices that some of the characters make within the space of the film and the plot. And without these statements that are made, say, Lawrence Fishburne's character making a certain comment to Jeff Goldblum's character in regards to, say, in regards to dating and interracial relationships, as it were. And so there's a very profound moment. It's very brief and quick, but it's so profound. And the scholars here make reference to that in the context, or in trying to provide this as an example of how Deep Cover is in fact looking upon itself, or calling attention to a number of these, what could otherwise be types of tropes that could be used in other similarly situated big budget, high profile films from the age, or Hollywood films from this particular age or era. And so this is set in the context of the buddy cop movie, but also the buddy cop and race relations as it's related to this particular cinema dynamic, the buddy cop duo, as it were, and how the film Deep Cover in those representations goes against those trends and actually forges its own path in a way that is very much intimate and very much in respect of the characters, but also in that way, in the way that it's capturing the humanity of the characters, also inherently acknowledges or respects or otherwise maintains the intact nature, or maintains the, let me put it a different way, through the capturing of the humanity of the characters, Bill Duke's cinema seems to also maintain the integrity of the the ambiguity and the nuance of maybe the social and political climate of the time that would otherwise be lost if those ambiguities or nuances were given kind of typical mainstream cinema treatment, as it were. And I find that set of observations, in particular, in this conversation between these two scholars, to be really quite thought-provoking. It was already a thought-provoking conversation from the very beginning, but my goodness, this adds further dimension and complexity to a film like Deep Cover. It's a film that is very intimate and internalized, and yet through that very act, it seems to be making these really profound statements on race and race relations. And so it is yet another example of the type of humane approach of Bill Duke and his cinema, and how this humane approach is actually highlighting the very complex dimension, not just between characters, between themselves, but also on a macro scale. So, wow, what a great conversation to continue with. So, for these and other reasons, it's really great to listen to this wonderful conversation. Once again, this is with Raquel J. Gates and Michael B. Gillespie, approximately 35 minutes. Please check it out if you can. It is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. That's not all, because then we get another brilliant conversation, this time with Claudrina N. Harold and Oliver Wang. This is approximately 17 minutes, and this is focusing in on the song from 1992, Dr. Dre and Snoop Doggy Dogg, or now Snoop Dogg. This is Deep Cover, a song, and the importance and the impact of the song, and the way in which the song is related to the film, and how it has its own impact and its own place and stature as almost a momentous point of the history of hip-hop, and indeed the history of music as expressed by these two individuals, and how they share their feelings about this song and what it represents to them, to each of them. Wow. This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They speak a little bit about how they first heard the song. For instance, Claudrina Harold speaks about how she first heard it as a high school student in the school cafeteria, and this was again in the early 90s, and so this was still a time where people would listen on the boom boxes, and to listen to that. And Oliver Wang hears that memory and that recollection, and he is so sort of happily jealous about how this was the first time that she experienced the song, and the way in which they described their interactions with the song, and how it resonated with them, the sort of the sinister beat, the driving bass line, and of course the lyrics and the power in the voices of the vocals. Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and the characters that they are representing within the lyrics of the song, and I'll get to that momentarily, but also the impact of listening to, for example, Snoop Dogg's voice, and how they describe it as having almost like a country song type of drawl to it. That's what they describe it, and how it had a new feel or a new sense of direction. And they describe, for example, too, how this song comes at a really key moment in a lot of ways. So first in the context of hip-hop music history, and also in the context of social and cultural history. So in the first context, how they describe the song as coming at this point in time where it seems to be representing a number of things. It makes certain references to sort of almost a musical past leading up to leading up to this particular moment. And so this is making reference or harkening back to not just to prior songs and movements of hip-hop music prior to this, so not just to like NWA or Gang Starr, but also to other references like Betty Wright and Sly and the Family Stone, etc., within the song itself, as well as paving the way for what is to come. So I think in the words of Oliver Wang and Claudrina and Harold, this is also about a song that seems to be representing the past as well as representing the future. So that is so profound. That is so profound. You know, I'm not, I don't, I wouldn't call myself at all I'm not an expert when it comes to the history of hip hop. And so from my own vantage point, this type of conversation is so amazing to me. And that's not all, because not just in the context of the history of hip-hop, but related to that history or intersecting with that history of hip-hop is also the history or the social and cultural consequences and situations at the time. This is, I think, expressed in a number of ways, brilliant ways in this conversation. So one of those ways is Oliver Wang and Claudrina and Harold are talking, for instance, about this time too, and what Oliver Wang refers to as the police or anti-police songs that were very much part of the time. And they're trying to discuss how this song Deep Cover maybe is a part of that, or maybe is not a part of that, or it's a little bit set apart from that. And I think Oliver Wang in particular makes a very interesting point about how the lyrics of the song and the characters that Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg are actually playing within their parts in the song is almost in line with the film itself and the story, in particular maybe the Jeff Goldblum character and the Lawrence Fishburne character, so the undercover cop and the criminal, as it were, and the two of them interacting in this very suspenseful, almost dangerous way. And this is expressed in this story of the song. And so, in fact, when we recognize that, there is this element of the parallel story track between the song lyric and the film. And so in that way, I think Oliver Wang is making a very interesting distinction, as well as making some connections with, he's making an interesting distinction, first of all, between this song and, say, the other similarly situated songs of the particular moment. But also there are some very key connections that are made too. And this brings us back to the conversation, and Claudrina and Harold reminds us too about the time of the moment. You know, this is the early 90s, and so and specifically 91 and 92. And so she mentions, for instance, some of the really important moments for her that in many ways defined that particular moment, or defined that generation, as it were, or defined her memories growing up. And she mentions Magic Johnson, and then she mentions Nelson Mandela, and then she mentions Rodney King. And Oliver Wang then also reminds us about how this film, Deep Cover, was released just prior to the LA riots of 92. And those LA riots were, of course, brought about because of the Rodney King incident, what happened in the previous year, 91, and then what happened in terms of the verdict and the reaction that resulted in the summer of 92. And the fact that this film, he reminds us about where this film comes in that context, and thus where this song comes in that context. That is very powerful. That is such a powerful reminder of the climate and the atmosphere in which this film emerges and the song emerges. So, and speaking of that too, this is a reminder too of the fact that this is a period, and this ties into, say, some of the comments from the earlier discussion about early 90s black cinema, and especially the years 91 and 92. And so here they make mention of Boys in the Hood, New Jack City, Juice, and Deep Cover, etc. Also, they mention the fact that, again, turning it back to the discussion of the history of hip-hop, this is also the moment where we see, as they express it, the expansion of hip-hop as well as the diversification of hip-hop. And, in fact, a result of that expansion of hip-hop is what they call the mainstreaming of hip-hop. And this also finds voice in a lot of the films that are emerging from this time. So this link between the song, hip-hop, the history of hip-hop, the history of 1990s black cinema, and the social and political and historical and cultural climate of the time, in particular Los Angeles of the early 1990s, it is all wrapped around this moment as expressed by this film and by the song itself, and how it has this long-lasting, almost everlasting effect and legacy that is even felt to this very day. Wow. The fact that these two, in their conversation, in this great conversation, they bring this context to the importance and significance of this song, Deep Cover, is truly amazing. And so, wow, this is so great. This is so great, and it is yet another great aspect of the character and feel and atmosphere of this film. It also, because the song is, of course, very much tied to the film itself and the character of the film. It also is giving us the sense of the life and the energy and the meaning and the raison d'etre, if you will, for this particular work in the context of hip-hop and indeed in the context of history. Their discussion on the song Deep Cover is amazing, absolutely amazing. And I love too how the discussion ends with the quote from Bill Duke in regards to the album, right? This album, as well as my film, is dedicated to those screaming, desperate voices of hopelessness and fear that are neither heard nor given the dignity of recognition. Bill Duke. Wow. Wow. So this discussion is wonderful. Please check it out if you can. Once again, this is the discussion between Claudrina N. Harold and Oliver Wang, approximately 17 minutes. And then we have the trailer. It's a brief trailer, but very, very much part of the time that it was set, or the time it was released. So please check that out if you can. And that's not all, because I've taken the liberty of removing the insert. It is an insert, and so I'm, as some of you may know, I'm not the biggest fan of the insert. I prefer the stapled booklet, but this is okay. It's, in fact, more than okay. It's quite good. It is a continuation of this motif. The use of the colors that we see on this great cover art design is carried through here, plus some more fascinating artwork renderings that we have here. Wonderful presentation, wonderful design. And when we look at the essay, this is again by Michael B. Gillespie, and this time it's the essay called "Who'll Pay Reparations on My Soul?" This is another great one. And he has this admiration for the film. He has this great love and admiration and respect for Bill Duke. He knows the film through and through. He knows exactly what to highlight, what to say. This is a phenomenal essay, the Gillespie essay. Please, please, please check it out if you can. It is so worth it, the essay by Gillespie on Deep Cover. That's part of this insert. So this is the release by Criterion of this work, Deep Cover. It is amazing. It is an amazing release of an amazing film. So memorable, so shocking, so thought-provoking, so filled with energy and humor and perfectly timed beats of drama and high drama and tension. Once again, the highs are high, the lows are low, and everything in between is so beautifully portrayed, going once again back to that great statement, that great philosophical statement on cinema from filmmaker and artist Bill Duke about the importance of capturing the humanity, the essence of the humanity of these characters. This is indeed the case for this brilliant, brilliant work, Deep Cover. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.